Well, kicking things off, our first guest join us today discussing gentrification in the Bronx, a hot topic. Many people are concerned about the South Bronx and the gentrification and the alleged gentrification that's taking place. Some people say gentrification is good for the borough, others bad. We welcome our political commentator, J.C. Polanco, and Ed Garcia in here with us today. And both of you, want to welcome you here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. So as we talk a little bit, Ed, I know that you have some very strong feelings. You voiced them. You had a blog out here in the Bronx talking about the borough of the Bronx and the gentrification. Many people have said that the Bronx is being gentrified. Some people say, no, it's not. Your thought?
The Bronx is definitely being gentrified when you look at pockets in Port Morris, when you look at businesses that are already being displaced. If you go to 3rd Avenue and the Hub, there are right now 5 big stores that have been priced out because their leases were up, and all of a sudden the landlords jacked up their rents to rents that they can't even afford anymore. So when you have big name stores that have been there for 30 years and are being pushed out because of the rents, clearly that's one indicator of gentrification. Then you have speculative purchases, case in point Rubenstein, who purchased properties that were well above market value. I'm a real estate appraiser by trade, that's my background, and jacking up prices in the neighborhood that are far beyond the reach for the average Joe that wants to try to make it.
And so when we talk about gentrification, JC, you think that gentrification is good for the borough?
Yeah, first of all, Ed does a great job. He has a great blog that has a lot of hits every single week, and I think he does a very good job as far as getting news out to Bronxites, just like you do. So I think that's a good thing, and thank you for having it. On this issue, though, I disagree with you, Ed. I think that gentrification is code word. Sadly, when you study the word, it's just code. It's a dog whistle that many activists use. That it's really anti-white, anti-new, anti-progress, and it's very offensive in my opinion. I have had thousands of students in my career as a professor, and there are many students that in the last few years have come to me and said they don't feel welcome when they come and live in certain parts of the Bronx and in Brooklyn and in Queens because activists turn on them regularly. They're consistently attacking them for coming into the neighborhood and, as you heard, jacking up prices and making things worse for the people that live there. And I don't think that's fair. I think that what many activists that are against progress are demanding is some sort of real social engineering that would go against progress, that would go against the natural fluctuations of business and rents. And by the way, Ed, rents have only gone up on an average of 1% in the Bronx, and you compare it nationwide, it's pretty much average. So this out of control thing that you're discussing isn't really the case here in the Bronx. And for the first time, one more thing, I'm sorry, Ed, for the first time, we are looking at people trying to come in and move in and be part of the Bronx, as opposed to move out and run away from the Bronx like so many did when we were growing up.
That's actually factually incorrect. The Bronx actually, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was an article that spoke about how the Bronx actually has the highest percentage of rent increases for one bedrooms.
No, I said on the average, Ed. On the average,
well, on the average,
and
on the average, the Bronx actually has the highest. The Bronx is also the poorest. The Bronx also has the least amount of home ownership at 18.2%. That means that there's 72% people that don't own property, and those are the ones who got affected by gentrification. Now, when you have people who say that they feel not welcome, generally these gentrifiers, when they come into the neighborhood, they don't want to be a part of the fabric of the neighborhood. They rather create their own little environment. Again, you could just look at Port Morris. What is Rubenstein doing down there? He's installing his own little businesses and creating his vision of what the neighborhood should be and not the vision of what the residents want.
Let me ask a question, JC, because when you talked about people moving in, some opponents say, listen, it's not just about people moving in, it's about people being forced out.
Well, you know what? Again, that's activist talk to excite their base, and it's true. This idea that landlords are coming into your apartment and taking you out is just false. It's not happening, and quite the opposite is happening. Take a look at the Bronx. We've had over 23,000 new housing units in the last 9 years. And when I talk about people wanting to come in and be part of our fabric and invest in our communities, when I was growing up and when you were growing up, I know here in the Bronx, we were dodging drug dealers and bullets. Today, our kids are dodging butterflies and maybe a mosquito. We have people that would never invest $1 in the Bronx, and in the last 9 years have invested over $10 billion right here in our borough. People like me are leaving, going to college, and coming back and want to be part of our fabric, and we can't afford the rent for affordable housing because we make too much money, and we can't afford to buy a house because we make too little money. So then we have a whole group of people that are in the in-between that I don't think Ed and his activists are really taking a look at how do we serve the people that are part of the Bronx, that want to be part of the Bronx, that want to come back and contribute to the Bronx. And I think that in the last 9 years, and I know I'm a Republican, but I got to give him credit, the borough president has done a phenomenal job bringing development and investment into the Bronx.
And I know you disagree wholeheartedly.
Completely, because first of all, we have the myth of affordable housing. It's not affordable for who? Just like you said, it's not affordable for the professionals that want to move in, and then it's also not affordable to over 50% generally of the population in the neighborhood. So what is affordable? You know, like when you have for a family of four, $63,000. Meanwhile, the average family of four in the same district is only making $24,000. It's not affordable to that person. But yet that family is paying much higher rent than they would in an affordable housing development. They're paying generally over 55% of their income on rent. And then, I don't know if you can disagree with that, but that's again fact. The Bronx has the highest rent burden in the city, and also one of the highest in the country.
There are a lot of reasons. You know, not only is anywhere you go, home ownership is expensive, but you know, when you go into home ownership, it requires things as far as having a down payment for a home. These are things that a lot of people don't have the availability to get, and it takes a while, especially for young professionals. Which is why I think it's a good thing that, including in that borough president's plan for the 23,000 new affordable housing that we have in the Bronx, they've also decreased the AMI that was necessary to have young professionals come in. So I really have a problem when activists come out against gentrification simply because I think it's a dog whistle. And I think what we're saying is we want to be social engineers, create a community where rents are going to be very low, where newcomers aren't welcomed, and somehow that's going to be a utopia for the Bronx where landlords are going to be able to pay their bills. It's just impossible.
All right, well, how do you create the scenario then? Because you have people who are watching right now, and they live and they're paying $400 to $600 a month, sometimes $800 a month, and yet and still you've got condos right next to you, $400,000, $500,000. What's the message to them? Because obviously they feel as though the handwriting's on the wall. They're out of here in a few moments.
What do you mean that they're out of here in a few moments? Ed.
Daren.
I know Daren. I'm just looking at Ed this whole time. I got to tell you, it's just not the case. I mean, the idea that you're going to have...
What's not the case?
It's not the case that the landlord's going to come out and take you out. We have laws to protect people that are renting. This is one of those myths that go out there to scare the public so they can get excited and become anti-whatever gentrification, social engineering message is coming out of some activists. But the reality is that this is the natural progression of things when things are going well. When we want our leaders to fight against crime, when we want our leaders to bring jobs, when we want our leaders to make the Bronx a good place to live, work, and raise a family like the borough president's doing, we're going to have new people coming in and want to be part of it. And guess what? The natural progress of the market is going to take some of those rents and make them from the $400 that is well below market value to something that can be more market value. And I don't think that's the end of the world. I think that when we look at the rents that some people are paying, these rents pay for the bills that many of these landlords have to pay. And how can we be okay with people paying a couple $100s a month, knowing full well that oil costs the same, gas costs the same, the insurance costs the same for the landlords? How are we going to have good housing where people can live and raise their families if the landlord isn't paying the bill to be able to sustain
Let me let Ed jump in.
So I just want to address the fact that why are people flocking to the Bronx? Because they've been priced out of every single borough in the city from the gentrifying neighborhoods of Harlem. You have a lot of people from Harlem and Washington Heights that are moving into the Bronx because they've been priced out of there, again, because of gentrification, not because...
Wow, that's not true. The Bronx is a beautiful place.
No,
we have the Bronx Zoo, the Bronx
You're just saying that
we have beautiful
no motive.
culture that you've put on your blog. You're always showing us
But you're saying there's no motive that it has nothing to do with being priced out.
I'm sure
and
there are
rented
many
out.
reasons, but you are exposing every day the wonderful things about the Bronx in your blog.
Exactly.
Those are reasons why people are coming in. How can we say that the only reason that people want to be part of the Bronx is because it's cheap? That's just not true.
The data says so.
No, but
I mean, the data is right there.
The data says we have a borough filled with colleges and universities, with the Bronx Zoo. We have many high schools. We have beautiful museums. We have things that you've put on your blog that make me excited, and people want to be part of it. How can we say it's just because it's cheap? It's just not a fair assessment.
It's the reality of the market.
No way, Ed. I don't believe
it. Where do you see the Bronx going over the next few years?
I think Ed's going to keep writing some good things about the Bronx. He's going to get people excited to come be part of it. It's true, and I think that we see the natural progress of things when people do the right thing. When our leaders are doing their job, crime decreases, people want to come and invest, and we're going to have newcomers want to flock in and be part of our fabric. We need to be welcoming as opposed to pushing these people away.
Well, gentrification is not you're saying how neighborhoods It's a natural progression. Gentrification is wiping out basically the working class from these neighborhoods. Look at Chelsea, look at Lower East Side, look at Harlem, look at Williamsburg, look at all these neighborhoods where it was predominantly, it had nothing to do with race generally. When you look at it on a global scale, it's an economic issue. It just happens to be a racial component to it in America because we can't escape that. That's how the system was created here. So it's not, it's not as easy as you painted that this is like the natural progression, because you look at the histories of all our neighborhoods in the Bronx, and they've generally been very stable working class neighborhoods for the most part. Now,
when we were growing up, Ed. And when we were growing up in the
my
Bronx,
family was working.
No, but when we were, I know that in your family, but
yeah.
when we look at the Bronx,
Yeah.
especially where I was, and it was a disaster. I lived on Crescent and 184th Street. But as you know, when we were growing up, the Bronx was not a good place. The place was terrible. Now homicides are lower than they've ever been before in the Bronx. We had over 3,000 people across the city being killed when we were growing up. This is a whole new city. This is a whole new environment. It's a natural progression of things where people invest in their
Is it a whole
community.
new city based on the fact of you have development and what people have alleged with gentrification? You have this
Listen, there you go again, gentrification. Daren, when you talk about gentrification the way you do, you're making it a negative. I think that it's not a negative to have new people coming into your community
It's not
and
a
wanting
negative.
to
It's
invest.
not, Jay.
You know
Jesse,
what? We didn't have any
you
jobs.
can't say-
It's
you
not a
can't-
negative, Daren.
It's not negative, right?
But it's a dog whistle.
Well, you call it a dog whistle.
It is, because when you say gentrification, what are you thinking?
You're thinking
Are you
people
thinking
moving
JC
out.
Polanco coming back to the
It's
Bronx?
not, but you talk halfway about people coming into.
Sure, that's a
but
good
let's
thing.
talk about the other people who go out.
Yeah, you know what we called it then? You know what
What
we
do you
called
call
it?
that?
White flight. Remember those? Remember those terms we learned in
No,
school?
no, absolutely.
When people
But Jay-
disappeared from the Grand Concourse and took those jobs with them, then everything fell apart and people didn't have jobs and our communities fell into disarray. Now the borough president's office and our community leaders are working towards changing things around. And instead of white flight, you have new flight coming into the Bronx and
So-
people bringing their money in and hiring people.
So
in
when
the
we
Bronx.
talk about Harlem itself, you wouldn't believe that Harlem is gentrified?
I think Harlem is going through an incredible progression. There's a Harlem Renaissance. Why is every
code word
Renaissance?
for gentrification.
No,
Yeah.
Renaissance is a rebirth.
That's code word for
It's called a
gentrification.
rebirth. It's called reinvestment. It's called, instead of people
If
flying
you're
out,
reinvesting
coming
in the
in.
community, you invest in the people who live there. You
Yeah,
don't
but
force them out.
how do you invest other than bringing jobs in, and you bring those businesses in, and you bring those new buildings in?
At what
Since when does that
expense? You've
become
got the
negative?
mom and pop business that goes out the door.
There is
I
no
can-
mom and pop business.
There's no mom and pop
There
business in
there
Har-
is no mom and pop business that
Where?
can sustain the
Where?
economies of these communities.
Okay, you
Where-
just
where-
answered our question
I
right
don't-
there.
Where? Can you
just
tell me
answered-
where?
You just answered
What
our own question about
bodega growing
gentrification.
up did you see in our communities that were hiring young people left and right? They weren't. We had high unemployment in our communities.
I don't know what Bronx you were
I
in.
don't. Well, I lived on Fordham Road and Creston
know what Bronx
Avenue.
you were in.
I don't know what bodega
Yeah.
was hiring and bringing all these jobs for these young people to be part of. I don't know what investor was bringing in new buildings for us to rent in. We finally have that happening, and I think that's a very good thing. You know what the
I
opposite
don't
is?
think the
People flying out.
But I don't think that people disagree with the fact that you have these things happening. It's nice that certain things happen.
Oh, you want it to happen without the new people participating in it.
The
You
new
want to
people-
just throw money and say, hey,
No.
here's a building and here's a business?
No, it's not about new people coming in. We're talking about the people being forced out. Come on, JC. Let's
Come
talk-
on, you know it's about new people
It is
coming in.
not.
You know it scares people.
No,
It does. I
think
speak
people
to
would
my
be fine.
students all the time.
I think people would be fine when you're talking about people coming in and people not having to leave. You're talking about the amount of people that are leaving. The reason why the Bronx is having overcrowding right now is because
Overcrowding?
Yes, overcrowding.
Wait. No, so now we have too many people coming in. Is that
From where?
We're actually.
Oh, there we go. Does it
where?
matter
Again,
from where? Does
yeah.
it matter to you from where these people want to be
If
part
people
of?
are having to leave Manhattan,
You know, it's only
to come to
only
the Bronx.
Darren and Ed would
No.
fight a $10 billion investment in the Bronx
No.
in the last 7 years.
And only
How could
Jay-Z
you
would
fight me
defend
on
that.
that?
No, but there's
How
a
could you
myth,
fight
and
me on
I
that,
have
Ed?
to address this. There's a myth that being anti-gentrification is anti-progress. That is the biggest lie that everybody that's
We have $10 billion,
pro-gentrification,
Ed.
but that doesn't mean that we're anti-progress. We're not anti-progress. We're anti-gentrification. We're anti-displacement. We're anti. I mean,
You're anti-investment.
Gentrification is
No.
violence.
And
That is violence
gentrification is
because
violence.
it is violence because people are paying what? More than over 50% of their income because they can't afford it anymore as the rents start creeping up. Then you have landlords, this is a fact, that are trying to buy out families, trying to say, oh, here's $5,000, move out. You can't move out on $5,000.
But you don't have to move out. See,
You
that's
don't.
the beauty of it. There's laws protecting. Ed, you don't have to move out.
Clearly, but
Clearly.
what if but a low-income family that doesn't have money, they'll see that as a carrot and they're like, hey, why not? You know?
You know, the reality is that the Bronx in the last 9 years has seen 23,000 new housing units in the borough. We've seen incredible investment. From where I grew up in the Bronx now is completely different. Over $10 billion in investment in the Bronx, that's huge. And if you look to your left and you look to your right, it's development after development, jobs after jobs. The mall opened up in Bay Plaza. We have thousands of people working that weren't working before.
Low-wage jobs.
Well, we've had unemployment decrease for the first time in 9 years. We've decreased to now about 6% unemployment, where we were hovering in the high 11s.
And we're still
That's
underemployed.
incredible. But still, those are huge progresses that you cannot argue against. And I think that we're going in the right track. How can we say no to what's happening in the Bronx?
I gotta say no right now because we gotta go.
And I love Ed, by the way. Ed's a good guy. I hope he doesn't beat me up after.
We'll see. JC, and thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure.
All right.